Do keep munching away, and yeah, it's probably best if I come clean at the beginning and say I'm not a professional scientist. I know some people are looking at this topic of science and faith, and that's what you're expecting. There are lots of scientists, professional scientists, who do believe that science hasn't buried God, but I'm not one of them. I am a medical doctor, so I did my training in Cambridge, ended up in hospitals in London. What's probably unusual is that I'm doubly trained, so I've also studied and trained in theology, and I'm a pastor of a church in London, which is what I do at the moment. I'm not assuming any kind of scientific background as we look at this topic, so that will be difficult because there'll be people with different questions. That's one of the reasons why I think the Q&A is so valuable. This whole week, this real life week, is to start a conversation really. So we're hopeful that this will just be the beginning of something, and then you'll be able to follow up. We've got evening events which you'll hear about, and yeah, we want to hear what you have to say as well. This particular topic that we're looking at, has science buried Christianity, has arisen out of the claims that science and Christianity are incompatible. And you'll have come across this kind of view. In 1995, Peter Atkins, the Oxford Professor of Chemistry, he wrote, I think I've got this on the screens, that science and religion cannot be reconciled. Religion has failed, and its failures should stand exposed. And that was back in 95, but since then, actually, the atheist assault really on Christianity has grown, and it's intensified with the rise of what's called the new atheism. And there's a whole bunch of books, lots of us will have dipped into them, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, which assume that science has made belief in God not simply unnecessary, but folk like Richard Dawkins, who is every Christian's favourite atheist because he's so brilliant for quotes. Dawkins even goes as far as to say, you cannot be an intelligent scientific thinker and still hold religious beliefs, which is quite a provocative statement. So has science now disproved Christianity? Does modern science rule out belief in a creator God? I think it's worth first approaching this question with a bit of historical perspective. It's worth pointing out this supposed conflict between science and Christianity is a very, very modern question. You'll probably know historically, many of the greatest scientists in history have been Christian believers, or at least believers in God. For example, Isaac Newton, who you know, he discovered the theory of gravitation, Michael Faraday, electricity, Robert Boyle, gas laws, Charles Babbage, computer guy, Louis Pasteur, vaccinations, James Clerk Maxwell, and I could go on and on. In fact, arguably, modern science only came about because of the climate of Christianity in the 16th and 17th centuries. There's a guy called Alfred North Whitehead, here's another quote, the historian and philosopher of science, and he put it this way: man became scientific because he expected law in nature. And he expected law in nature because he believed in a lawgiver, God. And the point he's making there, if the universe were just a product of chance, why would you even bother looking for order and design in the universe? And that's true historically. So, given that historically at least science and Christianity seem to have got on so well, perhaps we could conclude that it's in the last 100 years maybe which have made belief in Jesus much more difficult. But again, this supposed incompatibility between science and faith doesn't fit the evidence. There's a famous study back in 1916. A large number of scientists were asked the question, do you believe in a God who actively communicates with humanity? And the proportion who answered yes back in 1916 was 40%. The study was repeated in 1997, so over 80 years later, exactly the same question, and the proportion of scientists who believed in a God who actively communicates with humanity was now 40%. And those who did the study reported in the scientific journal Nature that the proportion had not significantly changed in 80 years. Now, clearly that is not saying that a majority of scientists believe in God, but it's enough, isn't it, to think that science and faith can't be completely incompatible. In fact, in the same year that Dawkins brought out his book, The God Delusion, that was 2006, Francis Collins, head of the Human Genome Project, the project responsible for mapping the whole of human DNA, he brought out his book, The Language of God, which outlines his belief that the genetic code is part of something called the language of God, which God used to speak life into existence. And in the book he describes his own conversion from atheism to Christianity. So my point here is really to say that it's too simple to say that science disproves Christianity. So there's a great many great scientists from the past and today who are able to hold science and Christianity together without any tension. I guess we are aware, though, that there is a conflict, and we often hear about it. It's in books, in the media. But I want to argue today that it's not a conflict between science and Christianity. It's a conflict between two different philosophies, two different belief systems, two different faiths even. Now I'm aware that Dawkins would be annoyed by having his position called a faith position. Next slide. But it's striking if you read The God Delusion, how often he argues on the basis of, I believe this. And certainly what Richard Dawkins... Oh no, I wasn't meant to go on there yet. Can we go back? Certainly the things that Richard Dawkins believes about the world and the things that Jesus Christ believes about the world, those things definitely are in conflict. So there is a conflict. What I want to do now is outline these two belief systems. There's Dawkins' position, which is often called naturalism, and I'm going to outline very briefly the position called Christianity, the Bible's teaching about God. And then what I want to do is ask the question, which of these two worldviews better accounts for the world that we see around us? That's a very natural question for the scientist. Which has more explanatory power? So let me start by looking at naturalism, which is different, by the way, from naturism. That's a topic for a warmer day. Naturalism is the belief that matter and chance is all that there is. As Bertrand Russell put it, mankind is nothing but an accidental collocation of atoms, or Jean-Paul Sartre, every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance. So that is the creed of the naturalist. What you can see is all there is. And this position is clearly in stark contrast to what the Bible teaches. And to give us a little sense of the Bible worldview, what I've done is I've put it on the screens a little bit of a speech which is from Acts 17 in the Bible. It's a speech by one of the early Christians, the Apostle Paul, that he made at the intellectual hub of the ancient world at the Areopagus in Athens. And he said this: the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. So this guy, the Apostle Paul, he's outlining for us, in summary, the Bible's worldview, which there is a God. He's a God who made humanity, and specifically it says that he made us for relationship with him. I'm going to keep going. And he goes on, therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He's talking there about Jesus. He has given proof. Now I'm going to come back to that word, and we're going to look at it later. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. So those are the two conflicting worldviews, naturalism, Christianity. And I'm going to try and argue now that the Christian faith better accounts for the way the world is. It's a view which fits more comfortably, therefore, with science than naturalism does. And I've got 4 arguments I'm going to try and talk you through. And the first one, up on the screens, is the Christian faith accounts for the predictability and the intelligibility of the universe. I think it's pretty obvious to us, most of us, that the universe is clearly ordered, it's predictable, so much so that scientists describe it by things they call laws. The scientific method relies on the fact that if you do the same experiment in the same place, or under the same conditions rather, it will produce the same results. And the scientific method just takes that for granted. That's the starting point. But suppose we ask the question, I've got 4 little daughters, and they're always asking me a question, but why, Daddy? But why? Suppose we ask the child's question, which we need to get used to arguing, they're good questions, and the children's question is, but why is the law of gravitation a law and not just a tendency? Why? Now you might think that's obvious. Of course this world is predictable. Of course there are laws governing it. But a lot of great minds tell us that is not a weird question. That's a really good question. There's an essay by Eugene Wigner, Nobel laureate in physics, in which he wrote, I think this one is on the screens, the enormous usefulness of mathematics in the natural sciences is something bordering on the mysterious. And there is no rational explanation for it. It is an article of faith. So he's explaining there how strange it is that the universe is predictable by mathematics. How strange it is that it's understandable. Albert Einstein, our next one, he said something similar. I consider, Einstein said, the comprehensibility of the world, i.e. the fact that you and I can understand and predict how the world is going to operate, I consider it as a miracle. And he continues, one should expect a chaotic world, which cannot be grasped by the mind in any way. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. So have a think about those 2 quotes. That these people are not trying to dream up ways to prop up the Christian faith. What they're doing is they're just observing how strange the world seems from within their naturalistic framework. So this thing, which is the basis for the entire scientific method, the fact that the universe is predictable and intelligible, they're saying that that thing is counterintuitive within a naturalistic framework. It's just mysterious. Why is it that way? Whereas, of course, if you step now and you consider those things from a Christian worldview, it makes perfect sense. So the Christian says, well, of course the universe is reliable and dependable because a reliable and dependable God made it. And he made it this way as a nice place for human beings in particular to live in, a place where gravity doesn't just switch on and off randomly, which I would find extremely problematic. And that is why, as we have already considered, the scientific tradition grew up very, very naturally within a Christian context. We expect law in nature, don't we? Because we believe in a lawgiver. So this thing that we observe and that we all take for granted, it just fits much better within a Christian worldview. Okay, next one. Secondly, the second argument for why the Christian faith better accounts for the way the world is than naturalism is the design of the universe. Now, I should really have put design there in inverted commas. What I mean in that term is the apparent design. So this point is a little bit different from the first. It's not arguing so much about how the universe operates. It's thinking more about how the universe is set up to operate in the beginning, how it's designed, if you'll allow the term. The reason I put the word design is because everyone agrees that the universe looks designed. The astronomer Fred Hoyle, he described the idea of random chance coming up with the kind of universe that we live in as comparable to the chance that a tornado swept through a junkyard and came up with a 747. He's saying that it looks designed, that's obvious. But according to naturalists, this appearance of design is just a trick our DNA has played on us. As Dawkins says, design is only apparent. It's an illusion. Lots of people have observed that if the universe were set up and if it were tuned even slightly differently from the way it is, there would be no universe at all, or no universe that we could live in. There's about a dozen examples of this in John Lennox. Professor John Lennox has done a brilliant little book called God's Undertaker, and he sets out all these arguments in full, but I will just give you a little taster of one of them. He says, if the expansion rate of the universe was slightly higher, then the universe would be just hydrogen atoms, each one separated by millions of miles of space. If the expansion rate of the universe was slightly lower, then gravity would get the better of it and the universe would just collapse in on itself. There would be a big bang, then there'd be a big crunch, all before you got 1 second on the clock. And so he says, imagine yourself with your hands on the dials of 2 dials as you're setting up the universe, and you have got to try and balance those 2 forces just right to have the sort of universe that we experience, that can be lived in. The ratio between those 2 forces has to be very, very precise. It has to be tuned to within 1 part in 10 to the 55. That is 1 with 55 noughts after it. Now, you might be a mathematician or an astronomer and you're used to big numbers, but for the rest of us, we need a little bit of help to understand what that is saying. And here's an illustration John Lennox uses. Imagine that you covered North America with coins, and then you put another layer of coins and another until the columns reached as high as the moon. And then you did the same thing with another equally sized continent, say South America, and then a billion other continents of the same size. And I forgot to say that at the beginning you painted one of those coins red. And you blindfold your friend and you say, please can you pick out the red coin. Now the odds are about 1 in 10 to the 40 that she will, which is actually nothing compared to how accurate the creator's aim needed to be in tuning that expansion rate. And there's lots and lots of other examples of how finely tuned our universe needs to be for life or even for the universe to exist. It's just to give us a little feeling for how lucky we got, or for how carefully the universe has been designed, depending on your point of view. I have to say, this isn't just a clever Christian argument. Everyone knows who is engaged in this field that the problem of this argument, Dawkins, all the new atheist writers have to engage with it. And Dawkins' response is to say, you've probably heard this, well, what accounts for that is there must therefore be an infinite number of alternate universes. There must therefore be something called a multiverse. That's what must account for how lucky we happen to be in our universe. I do want to point out, though, that coming up with this idea of a multiverse is not science. What it is it's a way of holding on by faith to a belief in naturalism by assuming something for which, by definition, there can be no scientific evidence for. We cannot, by definition, have access to those other universes. So we can't know. It's a little bit like the illustration is given of finding, a watch in the woods. You're walking through the woods, you see it. Oh wow, what is that? And you could come up, couldn't you, with an elaborate theory of how this thing could have assembled itself. And fine, if you're clever enough to come up with some theory, go for it. But why not at least consider the much simpler possibility that someone made the watch and someone else left it there? shouldn't that be at least one option on the table when you see it there in the woods? Alvin Plantinga, the American professor of philosophy, he's got a comeback about how irrational it is to say, well, I know the universe we look in looks absurdly lucky, but there it is, just suck it up. He says, imagine there's a poker game in the Wild West, and the dealer deals himself 4 aces 20 times in a row. It's the Wild West, so everyone gets a bit annoyed, starts reaching for their guns, points them at the guy, and the dealer says, wait, don't shoot, don't shoot. I want you to think about something. In all the billions and billions of poker games that have gone on in this world and in other possible worlds, don't you think it theoretically possible that a dealer could deal himself 4 aces 20 times in a row and not be cheating? Don't you think that is possible? And the story goes on, the people around the table say, yes, that is a theoretical possibility, and now we're going to shoot you. And the point that the philosopher Plantinga is trying to make is that something may just be theoretically possible, but in real life, nobody operates on a line of possibility that remote. Okay, next one on the screens there. The Christian faith doesn't just account for the predictability and intelligibility of the universe or the design of the universe, it also best accounts for human moral awareness. Under this point, it's a slightly different kind of point. I'm really trying to ask those who sign up to a naturalistic, atheistic view of the world, whether you can live consistently with your worldview. So I guess when it comes to this kind of topic, it's very easy to sit back in our seats and we fire questions at people who have a particular view. But I think it's important to make sure that we ask the same kinds of questions, tough questions, about our own position as well. Everyone sits somewhere. How does your position stand up against these questions? Jacques Monod, the Nobel laureate biologist, he himself a naturalist, he argues that most naturalists are afraid to follow through on their beliefs. And he writes this, the human species is no different from any other in being a lucky throw in the cosmic lottery. This is a hard truth for us to accept. We still pay lip service to and present as a basis for morality a disgusting leftover of Judeo-Christian religiosity. Man must set these errors aside and accept that his or her existence is entirely accidental. You must realise that the world is deaf to his music and is indifferent to his hopes as it is to his suffering and his crimes. Or Dawkins puts it, the universe has no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. So that what he's doing there is he's saying, please, if you're going to come with me and be a naturalist, be a consistent one. And when Monod says this is a hard truth for us to accept, I think if you think about it at all, you have to agree with him. For many of us, we instinctively know that something like the Holocaust was wrong, it was evil. We instinctively know that something like the chemical weapons attacks in Syria were evil. Recently, Richard Dawkins was asked whether his belief that rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact that we've evolved 5 fingers rather than 6, and he agreed. You see, for the naturalist, there can be nothing wrong with rape in an absolute sense. It's just that you have to say you have a preference against it. Naturalism also forces us to concede that our sufferings are meaningless. So actually, even asking the question why, which we're going to be doing in one of the talks later this week, why suffering, that is an invalid question for a naturalist. Within a naturalistic framework, our whole existence is without ultimate meaning. It just doesn't have any sense to ask why. Now, I'm not trying to pick on you if you're a naturalist, but what I do want to do is I see that this doesn't prove that your position is wrong, but if this is your position, can I encourage you to at least face up to the implications of the worldview and to try and live consistently with them? So please, stop living like there is a thing as right and wrong. Stop living like there is such a thing as truth, or there is such a thing as love, or there is such a thing as meaning. Or else, here's the alternative, if naturalism is forcing you to conclusions which you know to be false, then it might be time to reevaluate the worldview and to replace it with something more sensible. Okay, fourth and final one, and then we're going to come on to your questions to me. The Christian faith best accounts for the historical evidence of miracles. And you probably weren't expecting this one. Many intelligent people have investigated particular historical events, and they've concluded that the best explanation for these events is that they were miraculous. I'm going to read now a quote from a guy called Lord Darling. He was the former Deputy Chief Justice of England and Wales, and the quote is all about the resurrection of Christ. He said this: "In its favour, the resurrection of Jesus, there exists such overwhelming evidence, positive and negative, factual and circumstantial, that no intelligent jury in the world could fail to bring in a verdict that the resurrection story is true." Now, I don't think that proves the resurrection is true. If that was all it took to convince you, I think you've got to work a bit more on your arguing powers. But I hope it intrigues you that there is some evidence out there. I hope it intrigues you that there's something that a wise and a thoughtful person should probably take a look at. That's one of the things we're going to be looking at, I think it's on Friday. Can the resurrection really be true? In that speech that the Apostle Paul gave to the Athenians that I read out, do you remember that bit where he said, "In the past God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent." That means turn around. "For God has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed, Jesus. He has given," do you remember, "proof of this to everyone by raising Jesus from the dead." Now I wonder whether you find that word proof a little bit surprising in the Bible. Dawkins would have us believe that words like evidence or proof, they are reserved for the world of science. But here we're discovering that Christianity at least appeals to evidences, proofs. God has given us brains, and he's given us brains so that we investigate. He wants us to be sure of the truth. So let's imagine for a moment that inside this box, which until 5 minutes ago was holding some flyers, but let's imagine that inside this box is all the evidence that convinced Lord Darling that the resurrection must be true. What I want to do is to say, what should a consistent naturalist do with whatever is inside this box? You see, the naturalist has already made an assumption that miracles cannot happen. That's not something they can demonstrate or they can prove. Scientific thing of closing your eyes to and ignoring and throwing away evidence. Can I suggest it could be a great day to reevaluate your worldview and to come up with a better one? And my parting shot to you today is I'd love anyone who hasn't done this already to pick up one of these eyewitness accounts. These are written by one of the people who saw all the Jesus events and wrote them down. And we're doing something this week which I'm going to call the 21 coffee offer. And there's 21 chapters in this book. Each chapter is about 5 pages. And what I'm going to suggest is that each person takes one of these away and reads the first chapter, 5 pages. Get a pen, put a tick through something you found interesting or intriguing, put a cross next to something that you were annoyed about or you disagreed with, put a question mark next to something you just didn't get. And then find someone who you know who's a believer. I mean, today you can pick them out because they're multicoloured. But find perhaps someone you know in your lectures and say, can I just read out, have a look, discuss the things that I've read in that. They will be thrilled to do that, and they will buy you a coffee. And that's all I'm saying. Why not just do that once? Now, the reason it's a 21 coffee offer is there's 21 chapters. So if it goes well, why not do it for the second, third, and onwards? But there's no commitment to do that. At least do it for the first one and see how you go. Because what I would encourage everyone here to do is not to be the ostrich, not to be, stick your head in the sand, I'm just going to carry on regardless of the evidence. Please have a think about, I think it's one of the wonderful things about a week like this, especially one of the wonderful things about being at university, is it gives you the chance to investigate, to think about these big things that we often put off to another day. But why not take the chance to look at the evidence and evaluate it yourself? So that's my parting shot to you. I'm going to sit down now, or not sit down, but I'm going to hand over to Sam because it's a chance for your questions and your say. So over to Sam.